When a dashing officer and a beautiful deputy jailer join forces, it seems like a match made in heaven.
I think they had an attraction because they both worked in law enforcement.
He was sort of this charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard.
But just when their lives seem destined for greatness, an unexpected disappearance upends their world.
There was a buzz in the city about a missing police officer.
We knew something bad probably gonna come after this.
As investigators search for answers, they'll soon find themselves plunged into uncharted waters. A place where secrets bubble just under the surface and deadly sins flow like blood.
There are drugs, there's a lot of criminal activity. Officers are often the targets of bad people.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well.
He's coming towards her, and that's when it happens.
It just was a bad situation. Never should have happened.
They got away with a capital murder.
Monday, September 4th, 2006. It's Labor Day weekend in Memphis, Tennessee. All across town, families are enjoying end-of-summer barbecues. But at the home of Ethel Hayes, the absence of her beloved son, Tony, a 9-year veteran of the Memphis Police Department, is putting a damper on the festivities.
He hasn't contacted any of you and said he wasn't coming?
I hadn't talked to him today, but last I heard, he said he was coming.
She supposed been picking up his son and bring him to the barbecue too. And he never did show up.
That kind of alarmed the family that he didn't pick his son up because there are certain things Tony would not do, and not picking up his son was one of them. He loved his son very much.
Over the next few hours, Tony's family continues to try to track him down.
Did he answer?
Every time I call, I just get the voicemail. I'm telling you, something's not right. It's not right.
My grandma was start calling everybody that she knew that knew Tony and see could they get in touch with him.
No one knew where Tony was.
But the disappearance of Officer Tony Hayes is a mystery that's only beginning to unfold. One that'll have many wondering just who in this story was on the wrong side of the law.
We was just saying, why? How could something happen like this? Everything was just crazy.
Tony Hayes was born in 1969 in the new Chicago neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee.
It was a low-income neighborhood, but there was a sense of pride in the community. Even though it was low-income, our parents instilled values in us.
Values that the whole Hayes family took to heart.
The Hayes family was a very loving, caring family. Mother Hayes, she did not play with her children. They knew that she was their friend, but she was also the law in that household.
In this strict yet caring environment, Tony grew up to be a model citizen.
He was just a very disciplined person.
After high school, Tony went off to the Marine Corps. He served his country during the Persian Gulf War, and I think maybe saw himself becoming a law enforcement officer.
A dream that came true after Tony left the Marine Corps and returned home to Memphis.
When Tony became a Memphis police officer, that was a sense of pride and accomplishment for him.
For the next 9 years, Tony worked some of the most dangerous beats in the city.
Tony was an undercover cop. He do his job to the fullest, and he was a hard worker.
He ultimately arose to the rank of sergeant and was proud of that accomplishment, as was his family.
But Tony's success in life extended well beyond the workplace.
No, guys, I'm gonna go ahead.
He also fared well with the ladies.
Good evening, ladies. How you doing?
He was about 6'1" in height and very athletically built. And it was all muscle, and it wasn't no fat. He wore nice clothes, and he was a car enthusiast. So, you know, he loved cars. He always had a nice car and kept himself up. So like I said, the ladies probably found Tony very attractive.
Like his prized cars, Tony had a soft spot for beautiful women. And over the next few years, he married twice.
He met his first wife after he got out of the military. She was drop-dead gorgeous, as was his second wife.
Though both marriages ended in divorce, there was a silver lining.
Even though the breakups were hard, Tony's second wife blessed him with a son.
And that son became the light of his life.
He was very crazy about his son. It looked like he was Tony's mini-me.
He was an excellent father, spent a lot of time with his son, and really provided a great role model for that young man.
Though Tony was a loving father, he longed to have a woman in his life to help him raise young Devin. And in the spring of 2005, Tony met the drop-dead gorgeous 36-year-old Monique Johnson.
Tony Hayes met Monique Johnson while he was moonlighting as a security guard at the apartment complex where she lived.
I'm Tony.
It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, beautiful.
Monique would be what a lot of people considered very attractive. She described herself as light-skinned with long hair and having it going on.
Tony was really taken by her appearance.
For Monique, the attraction was mutual.
Dinner sometime?
Yeah, sure.
He was sort of this kind of charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard for Tony. He would take her out to eat. They were spending every day together. He would send her flowers.
But as the couple ignited their romance, it didn't take Tony long to realize that Monique may be more than just a passing fling.
There's no doubt Monique and Tony had a lot in common.
Monique Johnson was a native of the region, had a hard upbringing, but managed to bring herself up by her own bootstraps. She was married and divorced, had 2 children.
Like Tony, Monique also shared a passion for law enforcement.
Monique worked as a deputy jailer for the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
Having so much in common only heightened the couple's attraction to one another. But it was in the bedroom where the sparks really flew.
It became incredibly passionate, and it moved very quickly.
It was passionate, hot, and it seemed perfect. They were planning a future.
Though both Tony and Monique had tried and failed at marriage before, by the spring of 2006, the couple was talking engagement rings and wedding vows.
Tony was telling Monique, hey, one day we're going to get married and have this family.
They both believed that a part that had been missing in their lives had been completed.
In light of Tony's newfound happiness, his disappearance on September 4th, 2006 is even more concerning.
We want to know, why would he do this? Why he want to answer his phone, and why he want to call nobody and tell somebody where he at?
The following morning, Tony is absent from roll call at the Memphis Police's Union Station precinct, which makes his fellow officers extremely worried.
Has anybody seen Hayes?
By all accounts, Tony was a model officer, and when he failed to show up for his shift, alarm bells started to go off.
The police, to say the least, were taking Tony's disappearance very seriously.
But just what had happened to Officer Tony Hayes?
Try calling him again?
His colleagues and friends are determined to find out.
The Memphis Police Department was going to be very aggressive about it. We knew that it was going to be passionate for them as it was for us to seek what they thought was justice.
After a blissful year together, Deputy Jailer Monique Johnson and Police Officer Tony Hayes were already talking marriage.
Tony and Monique fell in love hard, and it was fast.
They appeared to be happy and a good match.
But now, on September 6th, 2006, Tony's been missing for more than 24 hours, and his colleagues at the Memphis Police Department are growing increasingly concerned.
The last time that his family had seen or spoken to Tony was on the afternoon of September the 3rd. He was supposed to come to a family picnic the next day, but he failed to show up. Tony goes missing, and it does become a big deal quickly. Because of Tony's occupation, both as a police officer and the fact that he worked as security at the apartment complex, gave him exposure to a lot of volatile situations.
While Tony was missing, there were several scenarios discussed within the police department amongst his friends and family. Did someone put out a hit on Tony? Was it the result of some sort of investigation in which he was involved?
They were looking. The police were actively looking everywhere they could.
While detectives comb through Tony's arrest records in search of a lead, a team of officers execute a search of his home.
There's no evidence of foul play, but a search of his residence revealed his Lexus is missing from the garage.
Car's gone.
Police were looking for those plates in that car.
By that afternoon, Tony's disappearance is the talk of the town.
Missing persons reports typically get some media coverage depending on who is missing. But when a Memphis police officer, a person in charge of protecting the community, is now missing, it certainly got our attention and was quickly on the TV news, radio news, even in the newspaper.
Though Tony Hayes' loved ones are grateful for the attention, their fears continue to mount.
I tried to be optimistic, but after a day had went by and he hadn't called his mom, he hadn't checked in on his son, it became very evident that something was wrong.
No one seems more concerned about Tony's disappearance than his beloved girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
She was expressing her worry over Tony because she had called him several times and kept getting his machine. And so she said it was very unusual because if he wouldn't call back, he would text back.
But Monique's other pressing concern is the well-being of Tony's 11-year-old son, Devin.
She decided she'd check on the son. And so she got a French fries and the hamburger and took that over.
How are you doing, kiddo?
I just wish I knew where my dad was.
Me too.
Later that evening, investigators get their first chance to speak to Monique Johnson at her home in a brand new suburban development.
When was the last time that you actually saw Tony?
Well, that would have had to have been the morning of Monday, September 4th.
She said that they went to the casinos and they stayed down there that night and that they came back and that he was going to pick up the son.
Was that the last time you heard from him?
Yes, and I went to the movies that night. When I got out, I heard that Tony had been missing.
Have you ever had any kind of problems in your relationship with Tony?
No, not at all. I love him so much. And I really just hope that you guys find him.
As a deputy jailer in Shelby County, Monique knew the dangers of law enforcement. She was extremely worried about Tony's whereabouts, and she was hoping that everything would turn out okay.
They checked her story out, and she had gone out to see a movie the night of Tony's disappearance.
But before detectives leave that evening, they ask Monique one last question.
One angle we're still pursuing is that his disappearance was work-related. So had he mentioned anything to you about work lately? Any issues?
Actually, there is.
Look, I ain't got time to be standing out here all night. Come on, open the door, stop playing.
She remembers something happening at the apartments where he had to pull a gun on a guy and the guy threatened him.
Yo, I need you to calm down now. Leave the premises now, sir. I'll see you later, partner. I'll be back.
This was the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted. So there was some fear that something could have happened there.
He was essentially off duty and alone and far more susceptible.
While detectives dispatch a team to investigate Monique's allegations, they return to their station for a scheduled meeting with some of Tony's closest colleagues.
They thought Tony's co-workers might know something about problems with former perps.
But what Tony's co-workers are about to reveal will stun detectives, leaving them to wonder if this top cop had actually been living a double life.
This isn't the kind of thing you'd expect to turn up, and detectives realized it was going to be a game changer.
Memphis police officer Tony Hayes seemed to have it all. A great career, a beautiful son, and a stunning girlfriend who set his heart aflame. But now Tony has disappeared without a trace, and detectives fear that he may have been targeted by a violent criminal with an axe to grind.
Police put themselves out there every day. Just going to work, it's possible they could be shot just for wearing the uniform.
Monique told police that Tony had recently been threatened by a guy at the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted.
But while searching for the mystery man who threatened Tony, detectives are also questioning Tony's colleagues at the Memphis Police Department.
The priority is to find Tony.
Yes.
And so I'm just here to ask you if you have anything you can share with us.
Anything could have happened to him, but his personal life is pretty complicated too.
What do you mean exactly?
That's when Tony's colleagues informed detectives that technically, Tony never officially divorced his ex-wife, Kayla Hayes.
During the investigation, Memphis PD discovers that Tony Hayes is married.
Tony's colleagues don't know, however, if Tony's wife knew about Monique. or if Monique knew about Tony's wife.
At this point, detectives can't help but wonder, could Tony have been murdered by his own wife?
Thank you very much.
To answer that question, they decide to speak to Tony's wife, Kayla Hayes.
They learn that she is actually living and working in Las Vegas.
After contacting their counterparts at the Vegas PD, a local detective heads to Kayla's home.
Ms. Hayes, I'm with the Las Vegas Police Department. Do you mind if I come in and speak with you for a moment?
Is this about Tony?
Yes, it is.
Come on.
Kayla explains that a couple of days earlier, she had received word from Tony's family that he had gone missing.
When was the last time you spoke with Tony?
Honestly, it had been a while.
Kayla explains that they had been separated for about a year and 4 months. In fact, they had only been married for about 3 months before that.
We lived together in Memphis, but it was clear really early on that it just wasn't going to work out.
She said they wanted different things out of life, but apparently, Tony had a wandering eye.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well. He was what could be called a player.
Were you aware he was seeing a woman named Monique Johnson?
Oh yeah, unfortunately, we'd spoke.
His wife was calling to talk to Tony. And since Monique had Tony's phone, she answered. And the wife's going, "Who are you?" And Monique's going, "Who are you?" She goes, "Well, I'm his wife." Well, that didn't sit well with Monique.
And how did you feel that he was seeing another woman?
Look, I have my life and he has his.
Kayla was adamant that she had nothing to do with Tony's disappearance and that she was in Las Vegas September 4th. And when they checked the car and flight records, her story checked out.
While Tony's wife, Kayla, seems innocent of any wrongdoing, her statement prompts detectives in Memphis to pay another visit to Tony's girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
They go back to Monique and they confront her about what they know at this point.
Monique doesn't deny any of it. She admits that she was furious when she found out that Tony was married.
When were you going to tell me?
Babe, listen to me.
No. When were you going to tell me? When were you going to tell me that you were married?
I'm sorry, I just didn't know how to tell you. It was over months before we met each other. Monique, it's just me and you.
According to Monique, Tony reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. Eventually, they reconciled, and since then, they hadn't had any other problems.
Detectives aren't sure what to make of Monique's story, but with no sign of Tony and no evidence of foul play, there's little else they can do.
They had a feeling Monique wasn't telling the whole story, but a feeling isn't grounds for an arrest.
While Monique remains adamant she has no idea what happened to Tony, investigators wonder if Tony's phone records might shed more light on his disappearance.
They pulled Tony's phone records and see he had gotten a text from a woman at 7 a.m. But this woman wasn't Monique Johnson.
Her name was Kim Chapman. So of course, the next question from police is, who is this woman? What's her connection to Tony Hayes?
That afternoon, detectives ask Kim Chapman to come to the station for an interview. When Kim arrives, she makes quite the impression.
She was very different from Monique. She was a professional woman. She was about 6 feet tall. She had a large frame.
Detectives want to know what her connection is to Tony Hayes. And she says they've been casually dating for the past few months.
The reason we called you in is because we've obtained phone records indicating you had contact with Tony on the date of his disappearance.
Yeah, I texted him because I wanted to go jogging. I was seeing if he was able to come with me.
According to Kim, she got a call back from Tony's phone a short time later. But the voice on the other end of the line wasn't what she expected.
What Kim reveals next will dramatically alter the course of the investigation into Tony Hayes' disappearance and illuminate just how sordid and potentially deadly his love life had become.
I think he was a fun-loving guy, a good guy, but someone who played the field too much, and he just played with the wrong one.
For more than 48 hours, police in Memphis, Tennessee have been desperately trying to track down their missing colleague, Tony Hayes. The search for Tony has led investigators to a trio of beautiful young women, including Tony's wife, Kayla, his girlfriend Monique Johnson, and the young woman now seated across from them at the station, Kim Chapman.
Kim Chapman admitted she and Tony were seeing each other and that she had texted him to go jogging the day he went missing. Investigators want to know if she had anything to do with his disappearance.
The last contact that you had with Tony was that text?
Well, I got a call back from someone else. I don't know who she is. Her name was Monique.
Hello?
Kim says she answered the phone expecting it to be Tony, but instead, somebody else was on the line, Monique Johnson.
Monique says, "What are you doing getting together with Tony?" And Kim's going, "Whoa, who are you and why do you care?"
And Monique said, "Well, who are you? I'm Tony's girlfriend. Well, he's been with me all weekend. Did you know about me?"
I don't care. No.
Kim claims the call dropped moments later, but not before she heard another voice in the background.
Tony.
Kim says she heard Tony's voice, and he was angry. And Monique was just giving it right back to him.
Monique Johnson had previously told police she had no reason to harm Tony. But if Kim Chapman's statement is true, detectives have proof that Monique and Tony got in a heated argument just hours before he disappeared.
The detectives don't think this is a coincidence.
That evening, investigators bring Monique in for questioning a third time and confront her about Kim's allegations.
We're going to give you one last chance to be honest with us and tell us what really happened to Tony Hayes.
I don't know.
Ms. Johnson, we talked to Kim Chapman. She told us that the day that Tony disappeared, you and him got into a scuffle.
Monique knows she's in a really bad place. So she says, okay, I'll talk.
Monique says that after she confronted Tony about his marriage to Kayla Hayes, he assured her there were no other women in his life. But over time, Monique began to doubt that he was truly faithful to her.
There were some flags. It would be unexplained absences or a refusal to really acknowledge where he'd been or what he'd been doing, or phone calls that he couldn't take. That's when tempers began to flare on both sides. He became very adamant about it not happening, or angry that she didn't trust him, and she was very angry that he wasn't trustworthy.
Monique claims that the situation came to a head the morning Tony disappeared.
The phone is going off, and she is compelled by the mistrust to look at the phone. And it's a text.
Monique says the text was from one Kim Chapman.
Monique said in her statement that she was tired of being played around with.
She couldn't take it no more. She was just real jealous.
She grabbed the phone and left Tony's house while he was in the shower and jumped in her car and began to call the female.
According to Monique, she was driving to her house while on the phone with Kim, and by the time she pulled into her garage, she was boiling mad.
Who the hell is this?
While Monique is having this conversation with Kim, she spots Tony in her rearview mirror. He's caught up to her and wants his phone back.
Give me the damn phone. Give me the damn phone. I'm not playing with you, I'm serious. Give me the damn phone.
According to Monique, that's when Tony lunged at her.
She doesn't think he's coming for the phone. She thinks he's coming for her.
She described it, Tony hit her this time.
Get out the car!
Monique claims Tony's aggressive behavior was so terrifying that she feared for her life. That's when she reached for Tony's .40 caliber handgun, which he'd recently left under the passenger seat of her car.
And that's when it happens. She remembers the first shot, and that's about all she remembers.
I'm so scared.
She asserts she acted in self-defense.
But if Monique had truly acted in self-defense, why is this the first time detectives are hearing this story?
From her perspective, because Tony was a police officer, she was afraid to go and confess to the same people that he worked with.
Monique says that in a panic, she turned to the only person she could think of, her son from a previous marriage, 16-year-old Donald Wallace.
Monique enlists the help of her son to remove Tony's body from the home, stuff him in the trunk of his own Lexus.
She made the son an accomplice to that act. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to your 16-year-old.
Detectives push Monique to tell them where Tony's body is. Monique does them one better. She takes them to the East Memphis apartment complex where she and her son Donald abandoned the vehicle.
They placed her in the squad car, and she took them directly to Tony's Lexus. And the body was in the trunk of that vehicle.
They backed it in so no one would notice the license plates.
That body had been sitting there for 4 days in this Memphis heat, and it was highly deformed. It was very hard to look at the body and even tell that it was Tony.
While CSIs process the car, detectives break the tragic news to Tony's family.
The police department came over there and told her that Monique Johnson has confessed to what happened.
Mother Hay was devastated. You know, so many hopes and dreams are lost when your child is gone and you know he's not gonna come back, and it's especially when it's due to violence. It just hurts more.
With Monique's confession, this deputy jailer now finds herself behind bars. Though she doesn't expect to be there for long.
She remained adamant that this was purely a case of self-defense and that she was the victim, not Tony.
But soon, an unlikely witness will step forward with new information. Information that threatens to turn the whole case upside down.
It's so inexcusable. It's not just the public doesn't understand, nobody understands.
On Friday, September 8th, 2006, in a Memphis police station, Monique Johnson confessed to shooting her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes, in a heated argument inside the garage of her home. A shooting Monique insists she only committed in self-defense.
She claims he lunged at her, struck her, attacked her, and she defended herself.
To find out if there's any truth to Monique's story, investigators bring in the young man who helped Monique move Tony's body, her 16-year-old son, Donald.
Your mother told us that you helped her carry Tony's body.
Donald, because of that, at this point, we're going to be charging you with accessory after the fact, okay? However, if you're willing to cooperate with us, there's a chance that we can get you off or help at least cut you a deal.
Okay.
Donald starts by telling detectives where to find the gun used in the shooting. It's in a garbage dumpster at an East Memphis apartment complex.
It was Tony's personal weapon, a .40 caliber pistol.
But that isn't all Donald tells police. He also makes a chilling revelation about the hours following Tony's death.
There was a time period after the shooting where Monique and her son left. They went to TGI Fridays, and then they went to a movie with some family members and saw snakes on a plane.
She went to dinner and a movie and enjoyed herself while her supposed boyfriend is starting to rot.
Was this the behavior simply of a woman in shock? Or was Monique actively trying to establish an alibi for herself in order to throw police off her trail? What Donald says next gives investigators a possible clue. In fact, he claims he was in the house at the time of the shooting.
Mom? He hears a series of gunshots go off in his own house, and he is instinctively terrified of what has happened to his mother.
Mom, what's going on? Mom, what did you do to him?
He eventually gets into the bedroom and discovers his mother, frantic by that point, and Tony lying on the floor bleeding.
The significance of that statement is that it directly contradicts Monique's version of events. She claims the shooting took place in the garage.
Police execute a search warrant of Monique's home, but at first there seems to be a problem with young Donald's story.
There was no blood. No blood up in that bathroom or bedroom. No bullets.
But as investigators take a closer look at the scene, they spot something unusual about the doors leading to the bathroom.
The paint didn't actually match up with the same paint that Monique had on her house. So you could tell that there had been one of the doors replaced in her home.
Detectives confront Monique about the new doors in her house, as well as the discrepancy between Donald's statement and her own version of what happened. Once again, Monique changes her story. She now claims that her fight began in the garage, but ended inside the house.
That whirlwind proceeds into the house. Tony's following her.
Monique says she fled to the safety of her master bedroom, but Tony forced his way inside.
He slams the door, locks it, and she feels a fist hit her in the back of the head.
Monique claims that before she knew what was happening, Tony was physically assaulting her. Thankfully, she managed to escape into the bathroom, but Tony didn't stop coming for her.
She's really getting scared, and she's telling him, Tony, just leave me alone, Tony, go. He's coming into the bathroom towards her. Finally, she finds her way back to her master closet, just behind the bathroom, and that's where her gun is.
She felt like she had nowhere to hide, nowhere to go, and nothing to do other than to defend herself.
After the first shot, she describes herself as going into a state of shock. She's unable to really accurately describe the physicality of what happened, the number of bullets that come out of the gun.
In the aftermath that followed, Monique says she noticed a bullet hole in one of the bathroom doors.
Monique went to one of the empty homes or model homes in the neighborhood and took one of the doors out of another model home and brought it and put it back on her bathroom door.
All the while, Monique's son was helping her do this.
Just grab his feet and help me.
But Monique insists that she only concocted her first story to try to minimize her son's role in the shooting.
She doesn't want Donald involved. She doesn't want him to go to jail. She wanted him out of it.
She was a mother trying to protect her son.
For Memphis authorities, Monique's shifting story casts serious doubt on her claims of self-defense.
Her story keeps changing. First, the argument and the shooting take place in the garage. Then, it had happened upstairs in her bedroom.
Later that day, the coroner's office releases Tony's autopsy report, and it casts even more doubt over Monique's statement.
He was shot 6 times. 4 bullets entered through his back, 1 through his chest, and 1 through his head at a downward angle. This woman, who's 5'6", was supposedly cowering from a 6'1" man.
4 shots in the back, 1 in the head, a downward projectile. So what does that look like? It looks like she's standing over him, executing him, and 1 in the chest.
There was no doubt in the state's mind that this was a premeditated murder.
Since the statement from Monique's son Donald helped investigators get closer to the truth, they grant him some leeway on the accessory charges.
Donald was placed on judicial diversion for his role, and he was really given a great opportunity to move forward with his life.
But prosecutors plan to pursue Monique with the full force of the law. On February 9, 2007, Monique Johnson is indicted on first-degree murder charges.
If she was convicted, she could spend the rest of her life in prison.
But was this truly the slam-dunk case that prosecutors believed? Or was Monique Johnson and her defense team saving the best version of her ever-changing story for last?
Everyone, again, they rushed to judgment. And all we could say was, you just wait until you hear the full story before you make your judgment on Monique Johnson.
In Memphis, Monique Johnson insists she acted in self-defense when she shot and killed her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes. But prosecutors believe Monique murdered Tony in cold blood.
The crux of this case essentially revolves around whether or not Monique Johnson was the victim, the perpetrator, or both of intimate partner violence.
Before the case even makes it to trial, sparring begins between the prosecution and defense. At a pretrial hearing, Monique's legal team tries to keep crime scene photos out of court.
The pictures that were taken of the car and the trunk when they opened it and found Tony Hayes there were particularly graphic. And it was the state's contention that it was essential that the jury see these pictures, because this is in fact what she did to him. This is what Monique did to Tony.
But according to the defense, these photos had nothing to do with how Tony was murdered and were just the byproduct of decomposition in the sweltering Memphis heat.
We were able to keep some of those pictures out because they were pretty nasty and pretty ugly.
The judge did not let any pictures of his body to go to the jury. I knew that was going to hurt us with the jury because pictures speak 1,000 words and jurors want to see them.
On February 12, 2008, Monique Johnson's murder trial gets underway inside a packed Shelby County courtroom.
It's a case that's captured the public's fascination, probably because it does involve an attractive couple, one of whom's a police officer and the other's a correctional officer. You'd expect them to behave better.
In their opening statements, prosecutors portray Monique as a scorned, jealous lover who was out for revenge against her two-timing boyfriend.
Tony did have a reputation for playing around with women, and I don't think she wanted to be played with. She was angry.
So angry, in fact, that when Monique discovered Kim Chapman's text message on September 4th, 2006, the beautiful femme fatale concocted a plan to exact the ultimate revenge against her unfaithful boyfriend.
The state feels like Monique's state of mind was. She was, in essence, creating a trap. Monique wanted to trap him back in her bedroom.
Tony was shot 6 times, including a round that was fired in a downward trajectory. As far as the state was concerned, that seriously undermined Monique's story of self-defense.
Then there's Monique's evasive actions in the aftermath of the shooting. She lied to police, she hid his body and the weapon used to kill him, and cleaned up the scene.
But Monique's defense team asserts their client did have a legitimate reason to be scared of Tony Hayes that morning.
The defense team essentially stated that she was a battered woman and was acting in self-defense.
She said maybe 3 months into the relationship was the first episode of abuse. A few months later, there's this next episode. And eventually it was more frequent.
To bolster their claims of abuse, the defense calls several members of Monique's family to the witness stand.
They testified that they had seen marks on her neck and on her thighs.
But for prosecutors, as well as Tony's friends and family, the abuse allegations don't hold much water.
The reason Monique said that she pulled the trigger, that my uncle was abusive, but no police report on domestic violence or nothing like that ever happened.
I knew Tony for 32 years. I never knew him to ever hit a lady. I think Monique was just trying to come up with a defense.
In fact, prosecutors say if anyone in the relationship had a history of violence, it was Monique. As proof, they point to a report Tony filed against her in May of 2006.
In a fit of jealous rage, Monique cut Tony's clothes, carved obscenities into his headboard and into the side of his car, cut the electrical cords on his appliances, and poured baby oil into his shoes.
Tony did call police, though he didn't go forward with charges.
So it was clear in the state's mind that he was the victim. He was the one who was being psychologically abused.
So was Monique Johnson a violent and vindictive lover like prosecutors claim? Or is she, as the defense suggests, a victim of abuse? On Valentine's Day 2008, jurors got to hear Monique's side of the story firsthand.
I was very concerned that Monique probably should not take the stand. But in trying to establish self-defense, the jury would need to hear from Monique. They would need to understand her mental state.
She would start crying when presented with certain things, like her prior vandalism. She would go, well, you know, he just did so much to make me so angry, and I felt like I could never be free of him. And it was all her being oppressed.
I would ask her, did you love Tony? And she would start bawling and say, yeah, I loved him. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want him to die. It became pretty clear that she wasn't just this cold, calculating killer, but was truly someone who was in love with Tony and didn't know how to get away from it.
But who would the jury find more credible? Monique and her emotional testimony, or the state and its physical and circumstantial evidence? On February 15th, they hand down their verdict.
She wasn't found guilty of first-degree murder, but a lesser charge of reckless homicide, which carries a 2 to 4 year sentence.
For prosecutors and Tony's family, it's a crushing defeat.
It was just like someone had knocked all the air out of me. Really? Did we hear this right? This can't be true.
The real victim of domestic violence in this situation was Tony Hayes. He lost his life. He was shot 6 times, and she got away with murder.
For Monique Johnson, the verdict is better than anything she could have imagined.
That was a huge win for us. Huge. Probably one of the best verdicts I've received in my lifetime as a trial attorney.
Ultimately, Monique was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After taking into account the 2 years she had already served, she only has to serve another 2.
And though Monique Johnson is now a free woman, her verdict is still a deeply divisive subject in Memphis. In a story rife with infidelity and mistrust, at least both sides can still agree on one thing.
There are no winners here. This was just ugly. These two never should have been together.
On her phone. We can have a destination wedding. Somewhere with mountains. No! Wait. Mom hates mountains. Somewhere with I'll be the best man, Van shouted. I'll give a speech that will make everyone cry. I'll talk about protein and love and the time I went to Florida for orange juice. Guys, Ted said, holding up a hand. The quiet part is the most important. Keep it a secret. The secret lasted exactly 4 minutes before Barbara Jean was informed. Chapter 22. The Hot Wedding. The proposal happened on a Tuesday. Ted didn't take her to a fancy restaurant. He didn't hire a He simply waited until everyone had finally left the studio. He turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft glow of the recording booth. He played a recording the full, finished version of The Survivor's Waltz. This time, it had lyrics. Simple, honest words about a woman who had spent her life being everyone else's hero, and a man who just wanted to be her home. Reba, he said, kneeling on the frayed studio carpet. I'm not a poet, and I'm definitely not a Canadian bicycle salesman, but I'm a man who loves you. Will you marry me? Reba didn't say yes immediately. She cried. She laughed. She made a joke about his bird legs. And then, she said yes. Naturally, the wedding planning was the true final boss of their relationship. Theme. Barbara Jean screamed, bursting into the kitchen with a binder the size of a phone book. We need a theme. I'm thinking a Southern Gothic revival with a hint of Lama chic. No, Reba said. Backyard. Small. Barbecue. Brock is already building a gazebo, Cheyenne shouted. He says the current porch isn't I've ordered the doves, Van added. Well, they're pigeons from a guy at the gym, but if you squint, they're very romantic. I am a survivor, Reba muttered to herself as she watched her family descend into a wedding-fueled madness. I can survive a wedding. I can survive a wedding. The wedding was held on a humid Saturday in June. The gazebo Brock built was, according to his own inspection, hurricane-proof. The pigeons Van released didn't fly away. They mostly just sat on the roof and judged the guests. Senior citizens were weeping. The cake had a small, plastic llama topper that Barbara Jean had insisted on. But when Reba walked down the aisle path, cleared through the chaotic remains of her past, she didn't see the pigeons or the sequin dresses. She saw Ted. Brock gave her away, his eyes misty as he whispered, "Don't forget to check the wiring, Reba." The vows were short. The music was The Survivor's Waltz, played by a group of musicians who had become their chosen family. I, Reba Hart, she said, her voice clear and strong, take you, Ted, to be my partner in music, in chaos, and in everything that comes after. As they kissed, a small fire extinguisher went off in the background. Brock had noticed a suspicious spark on a string light, and a pigeon flew into Van's hair. Reba laughed. She didn't mind. The chaos was part of the harmony. Chapter 23. The Business of Bliss. Marriage, as it turned out, didn't mean the end of the loony bin. If anything, it meant the loony bin now had a co-manager. Running the shelter studio was a labor of love, but the labor part was becoming increasingly literal. Ted was in high demand after the cult success of the Harmonious Hens Up, and Reba found herself juggling schedules for local metal bands, aspiring country stars, and the occasional podcast about competitive quilting. I need a system, Reba sighed one Monday morning, staring at a calendar that looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. I have a system, Barbara Jean chirped, appearing in the studio doorway with a crystal bowl filled with what appeared to be organic birdseed. It's called acoustic alignment. We schedule the angry bands during the waning moon and the happy bands during the rising sun. Barbara Jean, I'm scheduling a group called Death Rattle at 2 p.m. There is no moon involved, only earplugs. Oh, Reba, your chakras are so... Ted, I've brought the bowl. Let's do a resonance check. Ted, emerging from the sound booth with a pair of headphones around his neck, caught Reba's eye. He'd learned that the best way to deal with Barbara Jean was to treat her like a difficult chord. You just had to find the right resolution. The resonance is perfect, BJ Ted said, steering her toward the lounge. But Reba's right. We need a digital assistant, someone who knows technology and has zero fear of metal. I'm your man, Van shouted, bursting in from the hallway. He was wearing a headband and carrying a clipboard. I've been reading about efficiency models. Step 1. We replace the coffee with high-protein kelp shakes. Step 2. We install a treadmill at the soundboard so Ted can stay visually impactful while he makes. Step 3. I fired the digital assistant, Reba said. Chapter 24. Lama Namaste. While Ted and Reba were stabilizing the studio, Cheyenne and Van had found a new calling. It's the future, Mom, Cheyenne explained during Sunday dinner, her eyes bright with entrepreneurial fervor. Llamas are great. Put them together, and you have Llama Namaste. You're going to do yoga with the llamas from Silas's ranch, Reba asked, a sense of impending doom rising in her chest. Silas won't even talk to us, Van admitted, so we bought our own. Meet Lorenzo and Fabio. He pointed to the backyard. 2 llamas, one white and fluffy, the other brown and grumpy, were currently chewing on Reba's prized bag. They're trained, Cheyenne insisted. They walk through the class and provide grounding energy. Van is the lead instructor. He's calling himself the Llama Whisperer of Wellness. The first class was held on Saturday afternoon. About 20 local women showed up, lured by the promise of exotic tranquility. Reba watched from the porch, a fire extinguisher nearby. It started well. Van was at the front, looking surprisingly serene in yoga pants. Lorenzo and Fabio wandered through the mats, occasionally sniffing a student's hair. Feel the earth, Van intoned, his voice dropping to a soothing baritone. Be the llama. Stable, stoic, patient. Then, Fabio decided he was bored. He walked over to a woman in a very expensive designer yoga outfit and began nibbling on her ponytail. Oh, he's bonding with you, Cheyenne. The woman didn't feel the bond. She screamed. The scream startled Lorenzo, who bolted, knocking over a row of students like a fuzzy white bowling ball. Fabio, sensing a challenge, began a high-frequency braying that sounded like a car alarm being Chaos, the faithful companion of the Hart family, had arrived for the class. Students were scrambling for their bags. Van was trying to whisper to Fabio, who responded by spitting a massive green glob directly onto Van's headband. Brock arrived with a roll of caution tape and a megaphone. Cliff the area. We have an uncontrolled biological event, Brock shouted. Reba walked into the middle of the yard, grabbed the llama's lead ropes, and led them back to their makeshift pen. She turned to the fleeing students. Refunds are at the door, and free donuts at the studio tomorrow. She looked at Van, who was wiping llama spit from his face, and Cheyenne, who was crying into a yoga mat. Next time, Reba said gently, try kittens. They're much less likely to bowl over the customers. Chapter 25. The Nashville Temptation. The success of the shelter had reached further than the Houston suburbs. A talent scout from Nashville, a man named Marcus, with a silver suit and a smile that looked expensive, showed up at the studio on a rainy Tuesday. I've heard the work you did with the Harmonious Hens, Marcus said, leaning against Ted's desk. That's some of the cleanest analog recording I've heard in a decade. We have a spot in Nashville. Lead producer, it's the big leagues. Ted Fame, Fortune, and Nola Moss. Ted looked at the contract. It was everything a musician dreamed of. But he also looked at Reba, who was currently arguing with the delivery man about the price of soundproofing foam. He looked at the lounge, where Barbara Jean was trying to cleanse Marcus's briefcase with an amethyst gem. I have to talk to my partner, Ted said. That night, the house was quiet. Nashville, Reba said, her voice steady but her heart heavy. It's what you've always wanted, isn't it? It's what the old Ted wanted, he said, taking her hand. But the new Ted, The one who survived the senior strut and the llama incident. He's not so sure. Reba, this house is a disaster. Your family is insane. And I spend half my day dodging fire extinguishers and sage smoke. I know, Reba whispered. It's a lot to ask of a man. No, Ted corrected her, leaning in close. It's a lot to give a man. In Nashville, I'd just be another producer in a silver suit. Here, I'm the guy who kept the rhythm when the world went out of tune. I'm Step-Ted. I'm the one who knows where the hidden chocolate is. So, you're staying. I'm staying, but, he added with a wink, I'm telling Marcus that if he wants to record with me, he has to come to Houston, and he has to bring his own lemon squares. Chapter 26. The Encore. The years passed like a well-composed song, sometimes frantic and loud, sometimes soft and sweet, but always with a consistent melody. The Shelter became a legendary spot in the music world. Artists traveled from all over to record there, drawn not just by the sound, but by the heart atmosphere. They learned to expect the sage, the safety inspections, and the occasional kelp shake from Van. Cheyenne became a successful designer, creating a line of high-end loungewear that was hard-tested for comfort and durability. Jake grew up to be a lawyer, the first one in the family who didn't spend his time in a courtroom as a defendant. Brock and Barbara Jean remained the anchors of the chaos. Brock eventually retired from dentistry and became the chief safety officer of the entire neighborhood, much to the chagrin of everyone with a non-compliant fence. Barbara Jean started a YouTube channel called The Vibe Queen of Texas, which had 1 million subscribers who tuned in daily to see her cleanse various household objects. And Reba and Ted, they still had their Tuesdays. On one particular Tuesday, the 35th anniversary of their first meeting at Petit Jean, they sat on their porch swing. The Houston sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. You know, Ted said, strumming a soft chord on his guitar, I never did get to ask you that Russian princess question. The answer is yes, Reba laughed. I am a princess, of a very loud, very disorganized, very loving kingdom. The best kind, Ted said, leaning his head against hers. They sat there in the quiet, a rare, beautiful quiet that they had built together. Reba Hart looked out at her world. Her roots were still planted in the past, but her life was blooming in the present. She was a mother, a wife, a business owner, and a fighter. She was a survivor, and the best part of the song was that it never truly ended. It just went into an encore. Chapter 27. The Acoustic Anniversary. The studio was approaching its 10th anniversary, and the town of Houston was buzzing. Even the local news had sent a reporter to cover the story of the miracle of the Shelter. It's a branding opportunity, Ted, Barbara Jean announced, currently hovering over a guest list that included half the population of Texas and a choir of rescue poodles. We need a signature scent for the event. I'm thinking acoustic amber with a bass note of resilience. Barbara Jean, the only scent I want is the smell of a clean floor and coffee that hasn't been replaced by a protein shake, Reba said, trying to organize the VIP seating. The seating chart is a code violation waiting to happen. Reba, Brock shouted, currently measuring the distance between the chairs with a laser level. If a fire breaks out during the poodle chorus, we have 3.4 seconds to evacuate. I've installed extra exit signs that glow in the dark and play a siren if you lean on them. Van, meanwhile, was trying to choreograph a visual impact performance. I've hired a group of synchronized swimmers for the fountain out front. They're going to spell out Ted and Reba using only their legs and glitter. It's going to be viral. Legs. Ted leaned against the mixing board, watching the storm gather. Reba, remind me why we didn't just go to a cabin in the woods. Because the hearts don't do quiet, Ted. We do catastrophe with a side of lemon squares. The night of the anniversary arrived, and it was every bit the spectacle Barbara Jean had dreamed of. The rescue poodles sang, the synchronized swimmers survived the glitter, and the fire extinguisher only went off once when Brock mistook a fog machine for a grease fire. In the middle of the noise, Reba found herself standing on the edge of the crowd. She looked at Ted, who was currently being lectured by a local music critic about the organic texture of the sound-dampening foam. He caught her eye and winked. At that moment, she realized that they weren't just surviving the chaos anymore. They were the architects of it, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 28. Elizabeth, the baby who had once been the center of the orange juice crisis, was now 16. She was tall, red-headed, and possessed a heartism that was both terrifying and impressive. I'm starting a band, Grandma Elizabeth announced during Sunday brunch, her eyes fixed on a guitar catalog. It's called the uncontrolled biological events. We're going to be loud, defiant, and we're going to wear sequins. Reba felt a wave of déjà vu so strong it made her head spin. Elizabeth, that's a very descriptive name. Have you talked to Step-Teed about the sound? I don't need sound advice, Grandma. I need a roadie. I've already hired Uncle Van. He says he's going to build me a speaker cabinet that doubles as a treadmill. Van, sitting nearby, nodded proudly. It's about sonic stamina. Mrs. H. Elizabeth is going to be the first musician to run 5 miles during a 3-minute song. Reba looked at Elizabeth. She saw herself in the girl's eyes, the same fighter's heart, the same refusal to be anything other than exactly who she wanted to be. But she also saw Cheyenne's flair and a bit of Brock's stubbornness. What does your grandfather think? Reba asked. He's currently in the garage building me a stage that can withstand a Category 4 hurricane, Elizabeth said, rolling her eyes. He says uncontrolled is a code violation, so he's trying to install a governor on my amplifier. Good luck with that, Reba laughed. That night, Reba sat on the porch with Ted. She's going to be a handful, isn't she? She's a survivor, Reba, Ted said, strumming a soft chord. It's in the blood, and besides, I think the uncontrolled biological events is the perfect opening act for the harmonious hens. Chapter 29. The Wisdom of the Porch. The years had softened the edges of the conflicts, but they hadn't dimmed the intensity of the love. Brock and Barbara Jean had moved into a house just down the street, a house that Brock had personally retrofitted to be safety compliant for the next 300 years. Barbara Jean's YouTube channel was now a global phenomenon, and she was currently trying to convince the town council to rename the street the way we were waiting. Reba stood on her porch, watching the sunset. You're thinking about the first barbecue, aren't you? Ted asked, appearing behind her with a glass of wine. 15 times, Reba whispered. It felt like a lifetime ago. I was so tired, Ted, I felt like I was running a race with no finish line. And now, I'm just enjoying the view. I look at my kids, my grandkids, this loony bin of a family, and I realized that the race wasn't about the finish line. It was about the people running beside me, even the ones with fire extinguishers. Ted smiled and pulled her close. You did more than just pick up the slack, Reba. You built a world where everyone has a place to be crazy and a place to be loved. Including you. Especially me. They sat there as the stars began to poke through the Houston humidity. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the faint sound of a teenager practicing a very loud guitar solo. It was messy, it was uncontrolled, and it was beautiful. Chapter 30. The Eternal Rhythm. The final chapter of the Heart story hasn't been written yet, because in Houston, the music never really stops. Reba Hearted is still the heart of the home. She still hides the chocolate, still manages the books, and still knows exactly when someone is lying about their orange juice intake. Brock still checks the wiring. Barbara Jean still sees visions. Van still dreams of visual impact. And Elizabeth is currently planning a world tour that involves at least 3 llamas. But every Tuesday, the world goes quiet. The red-headed woman and the man with the guitar case find their way to a small booth in a quiet bistro. They don't need to pretend anymore. They don't need to be Russian princesses or Canadian bicycle salesmen. They're just Reba and Ted. She's a survivor, but she's also a teacher, a partner, and a legend. And as the Houston sun sets over the backyard gazebo, she knows that no matter what storm comes next, she has exactly what she needs to face it. Because she's a heart, and a heart never stops loving. Chapter 31. The Llama Tour Chronicles. The world tour Elizabeth had envisioned turned out to be a slightly more grounded, a fairer, 3-week southwestern sweep in a converted tour bus that Van had reinforced with enough high steel to survive a zombie apocalypse. I call it the Protein Mobile, Van declared, patting the side of the bus. It's powered by biodiesel and the collective will of the Hart family. And look, I've installed a llama-friendly ventilation system in the back. Fabio and Lorenzo, the 2 llamas who had somehow become the band's official mascots, were currently staring out the bus windows with their usual air of profound judgment. Mom, please tell me you're coming, Cheyenne pleaded, clutching her designer clipboard. I'm the tour manager, but I don't know how to handle a rider. That includes both gluten-free kale chips and industrial-strength llama grooming brushes. Reba looked at Ted. Ted looked at his guitar. I think the studio can survive 3 weeks of silence, Ted said, a mischievous glint in his eye. And besides, someone has to make sure Van doesn't try to use the bus engine to blend his roadie shakes. The tour was a whirlwind of glitter, feedback, and unexpected mechanical failures. Elizabeth's band, the uncontrolled biological events, played in dive bars, community centers, and one very confused rodeo. Elizabeth was a natural. On stage, she was a firebrand, her red hair thrashing as she ripped through solos that made Ted beam with pride. But the real drama happened behind the scenes. In Albuquerque, Barbara Jean decided the band needed a spiritual uplift and attempted to lead a meditation session in the middle of a crowded parking lot. "Focus on your inner llama," she shouted over the roar of passing traffic. "Be stoic, be fluffy, be ready to spit on your obstacles." Van, meanwhile, was treating the tour like an Olympic training camp. He had the band doing burpees before every set. It's about stage stamina. You can't hit those high notes if your core isn't engaged. Brock spent most of his time checking the wiring of every venue they visited. This circuit board is held together by bubble gum and prayers. Reba. One power cord and this whole place goes up like a Texas brush fire. Reba found herself doing exactly what she had always done, surviving the storm. She managed the budget, smoothed over arguments between Cheyenne and the band, and once, memorably, used her mom's stare to convince a surly bouncer that Fabio the llama was, in fact, a registered emotional support animal. Chapter 32. The Legacy Project. When they returned to Houston, exhausted but triumphant, Reba was met with a surprise. A filmmaker named Sarah, known for her deep-dive documentaries on Southern grit, was waiting at the shelter. "I want to tell you a story, Reba," Sarah said, her camera equipment already set up in the lounge. "Not just the story of the studio, the story of the woman who held it all together, the heart of Houston." Reba laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "I'm just a mom who works too hard. Sarah, there's no movie in that." "On the contrary," Sarah insisted, "there's a survival epic in that." The filming process was an emotional excavation. Reba had to talk about the early days, the shock of the divorce, the mountain of laundry, the fear of not being enough. She sat in the booth, the same booth where Ted had proposed, and let the memories pour out. "I spent so many years being a shield," Reba told the camera, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought if I stopped fighting for even a second, the whole house would fall down. I didn't realize that my family didn't just need a fighter. They needed to see me breathe." The documentary crew followed the family around for weeks. They captured Brock's safety inspections, Barbara Jean's vibe checks, and Van's latest attempts at visual impact. They saw the chaos, but they also saw the underlying rhythm, the way the hearts always showed up for each other, no matter how crazy things got. One afternoon, they filmed a scene on the porch swing. Ted was playing the Survivor's Waltz softly in the background. "What's the secret, Reba?" Sarah asked from behind the camera. "How do you keep going when the world keeps throwing llamas at you?" Reba looked at the sunset. "You don't try to stop the llamas, Sarah. You just learn how to ride them. And you make sure you have someone beside you who isn't afraid to get a little spit on their shirt." Chapter 33. The Red Carpet Chaos. The premiere of The Heart of Houston was held at a historic theater downtown. Barbara Jean had spent months preparing, and the result was a red carpet event that looked like a collaboration between a Hollywood gala and a Texas state fair. "Sequins for everyone," Barbara Jean announced, handing out shimmering jackets. "We must reflect the light of our collective resilience." Van arrived in a tuxedo that was so tight he could barely breathe. "Its impact fit, Mrs. H. It highlights the results of the healthy roadie regimen." Brock was wearing a high-visibility vest over his suit. "I've inspected the emergency exits of this theater, Reba. There's some. If the audience gets too emotional and starts a stampede, we're heading for the stage door." As the lights dimmed and the movie began, the theater went silent. Reba sat between Ted and Cheyenne, her heart racing. The film was beautiful. It showed the struggle, the humor, and the raw, unfiltered love of the Hart family. It didn't shy away from the hard parts, the fights, the tears, the exhaustion. But it also showed the magic, the way a quiet Tuesday night could feel like a victory. When the credits rolled to the sound of Ted's music, the audience stood up. The applause was deafening. Sarah walked onto the stage and beckoned Reba to join her. Reba stood up, her legs shaking. She looked at her family: Brock, Barbara Jean, Cheyenne, Van, Jake, Elizabeth, all of them cheering, their faces wet with tears. "This isn't my movie," Reba said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the theater. This is a movie about a bunch of people who refuse to give up on each other. It's a movie about the music we make together. Chapter 34. The Waltz Continues. The documentary was a hit, winning awards and bringing a new wave of artists to the shelter. But for Reba, the best part wasn't the fame or the accolades. It was the shift in her own heart. She realized that she didn't have to carry the umbrella anymore. Her kids were grown. Her grandkids were finding their own rhythm. And Ted was always there to hold the light. One evening, a few months after the premiere, the house was actually quiet. Brock and Barbara Jean were on a safety-themed cruise. Cheyenne and Van were at a yoga retreat. Elizabeth was at a recording session in Nashville. Reba and Ted sat on the porch. The Houston humidity was there, as always, but it felt like a familiar embrace. "You're thinking about the first barbecue again?" Ted asked, leaning back in the swing. "No," Reba smiled, taking a sip of her wine. "I was thinking about the next one." "No, Ted. The first barbecue where I don't feel like I have to flip all the burgers myself." Ted laughed and pulled her close. "I'll handle the burgers, Reba. You just handle the music." They sat there in the rare, beautiful, quiet, watching the stars. Reba Harted was a survivor. But she was also a woman who had finally learned that the most important part of surviving is knowing when to let the music take over. And as the Texas moon rose over the backyard gazebo, the rhythm went on, messy, uncontrolled, and absolutely perfect. The end. The Texas Flip. A novel of risk, love, and real estate. Chapter 1. The Curse of the Redhead. The Texas sun was an unapologetic weight, pressing down on the asphalt of the Houston suburbs, until the air shimmered with the ghost of heat. Inside the Hart's household, Reba Hart sat at the kitchen table. A stack of closing documents mocked her from under the fluorescent light. She was a woman built of grit and fire-red hair, but today, the fire felt like it was smoldering under a pile of damp ashes. "I sold it," Reba announced to the empty room, her voice a mixture of triumph and poison. "That little starter home on Elm Street, the one I've been nursing like a sick kitten for 6 months." Cheyenne, her eldest daughter, wandered in, balancing a toddler on one hip, and a look of vague concern on her face. "That's good, right, Mom? Isn't selling houses the whole point of your job?" Reba let out a dry, hacking laugh. "In theory, yes. In practice, I am apparently a charitable organization for people named David Davids." She explained the sting. David Davids, a man whose parents were clearly as uninspired as his business ethics was. Another agent at her firm. He hadn't bought the house to live in. He hadn't bought it to help a family. He had bought it to flip it. Within 48 hours, he had listed it for $50,000 more than Reba had sold it for. 50 grand, Cheyenne, Reba whispered, the number tasting like copper in her mouth. "He made my annual salary in a weekend, because he had the stones to buy low. I'm the one getting tossed around while everyone else lands on their feet." "Well," Cheyenne said, sliding into the chair opposite her mother, "why don't you just be the flipper? You know more about these houses than anyone." Reba looked at her daughter with the weary patience of a woman who had seen the bottom of a wine bottle and the bottom of a bank account. "Because, honey, the bank doesn't lend money to red-headed women with grit. They lend it to people with high credit scores. Mine took a nosedive during the divorce and never pulled out of the tailspin. Don't ever get divorced. Cheyenne, it ruins your soul and your interest rates." The conversation shifted, as it often did in the Hart house, toward the absurd. They discussed Van, Cheyenne's husband, a former high school football star whose professional career had ended with an injury and whose current career consisted mostly of being charming and occasionally profound in the most unexpected ways. "Van has a pre-approval letter," Cheyenne mentioned casually. Reba froze. "He what?" "He got it months ago. Every time he and Brock get into a fight, and Brock threatens to kick us out of the guest house, Van gets paranoid. He wanted a quick exit strategy. He's got the credit. Mom, he's got the golden ticket." Reba's mind began to work. It was a dangerous sound, the sound of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and a bottle of whiteout in the junk drawer. Chapter 2. The Froth on the Market. Van Montgomery was a man of simple pleasures. A good sandwich, a loud television, and the unwavering belief that he was the protagonist of a very interesting movie. When Reba approached him with a partnership, he didn't react with the excitement she expected. Instead, he leaned back in his recliner, looking like a retired philosopher king. "Pass," Van said. Reba blinked. "Pass, Van. I am offering you the chance of a lifetime. We use your credit, my brains, and we rake in the cash. We could be the next power duo of Houston real estate. Mrs. H. Vance said, using the nickname that always made Reba feel both respected and incredibly old. The housing market is falsely inflated. It's full of untrained speculators. To quote Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, the froth is on the market. Reba stared at him. Do you even know what that means? Did you just eat a dictionary? I know that when an old guy in a suit talks about money, I listen, Van replied. Risk is for people who have something to gain. I have everything I need right here. Why would I gamble our future on a bubble that's about to burst? But Reba knew Van. She knew he was a creature of ego. She knew that he prided himself on his stones, that elusive, masculine quality of bravery. You're just afraid, Reba challenged, her eyes narrowing. David Davids is making a fortune because he has the nerve. You're just talking. You're all talk and no trigger. Van bristled. The air in the room changed. You think I don't have stones? I put forks in toasters. Mrs. H. I live on the edge. A fork in a toaster gets you an English muffin and a mild heart arrhythmia. Reba snapped. Buying a house gets you a life. I guarantee you. I will find a house to flip within the week. 7 days. You, in or out? Van looked at her, the challenge hanging between them like a physical weight. 1 week. Or 7 days. Whichever comes first. You find the deal, I provide the credit. But if it blows up, it's on your red head. Chapter 3. The Satellite Confessional. While Reba and Van were plotting their financial empire, Brock Hart was experiencing a different kind of crisis. Brock, a dentist with a penchant for midlife crisis purchases and a leopard print thong he thought was fun, was currently lost. He was driving his expensive SUV, his second wife Barbara Jean in the passenger seat. They were supposed to be at the They were currently in a cul-de-sac that looked suspiciously like the one they had left 20 minutes ago. We missed the first act. Brock, Barbara Jean sighed. She was a woman who lived for drama, ruffles, and the feeling of being cherished. If you had just asked for directions. I don't need directions. I'm a dentist. I navigate complex root canals every day, Brock shouted, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. And don't talk to me about the opera. No straight man wants to go to the opera. I bought those tickets as a sacrifice. A sacrifice. Barbara Jean's voice hit a high, tremulous note. I just wanted adult conversation. Brock, I spend all day with a 3. I need someone to talk to who doesn't use a diaper. In a fit of pique, Barbara Jean reached out and pressed the blue button on the rearview mirror, the Econostar assistance system. Don't touch that, Brock yelled. It costs $2 a minute, plus tax. Hello, this is Hal from Econostar. How can I assist you today? A smooth, calm voice drifted through the car speakers. Barbara Jean's face lit up. Oh, I'm Barbara Jean. You sound very helpful. I try to be. Barbara Jean, are you lost? In more ways than one. Hal, in more ways than one. Over the next week, as Reba scoured the city for a house, Barbara Jean found a new car. While Brock retreated into his silence and his dental journals, Barbara Jean sat in the parked car in the garage, talking to the satellite. She told Hal about her childhood in friendly Texas. She told him about her sister, Butugli Lorianne. She told him about the loneliness that gnawed at the edges of her boobly personality. It was a romance of the digital age, a woman seeking a voice in the dark, and a man paid by the hour to listen. Chapter 4. The 7 Day. Reba was exhausted. She had looked at 52 houses in 6 days. She had smelled mold that could melt paint. She had seen foundations that looked like a jigsaw puzzle after an earthquake. She had talked to neighbors who owned more shotguns than teeth. On the 7th day, she sat in the kitchen, defeated. I got nothing, Van, she admitted when he walked in, looking smug. Zilch, you were right. I'm cursed. I look at a house and I see the plumbing failing. I see the termites. I see the catastrophe. I don't have the stones. Van looked at her, and for a moment, the bravado dropped. He saw his mother-in-law, the woman, who had held the family together through his own failures and Cheyenne's struggles, looking truly broken. Well, Mrs. H. Van said softly, it's a good thing I didn't wait for you. Reba looked up. What? I bought a house. Reba's heart stopped. You what? Without an inspection? Without me seeing it? I had to move fast, Van said, his chest puffing out. There were 15 other offers. I took it as is. No risk, no reward. Right? That's what the flippers do. Van, as is in real estate, means this house is a portal to hell. Reba screamed. You used our money, our future on a gamble. I believe in us, Van said, though his voice wavered slightly. I believe in your luck. You're like a four-leaf clover with a temper. Tomorrow, we go see the verdict. Chapter 5. The Revelation in the Driveway. The house was a beige bungalow that looked like it was sighing under the weight of its own existence. Reba stood on the sidewalk, clutching her briefcase like a shield. I can't do it, Van, she whispered. If we walk in there and the inspector tells us the foundation is cracked, we lose everything. I'm not lucky. Every time something good happens, the other shoe drops, and usually, it's a heavy boot. Van walked over to her. He didn't look like the goofy kid who put forks in toasters anymore. He looked like a man who understood something Reba had forgotten. Mrs. H, you think you're jinxed? Van said. But look at me. When my parents kicking me out, I found a home with you. When I got hurt, you helped me heal. When Cheyenne was struggling with the sauce, you were the one who kept the light on. Things don't get worse when you're around. They get better. You're not the jinx. You're the cure. Reba felt a tear prick her eye. Van, that is the sweetest, most manipulative thing you have ever said. I mean it. Now, do you want to back out? I'll take the hit. I'll let you off the hook right now before we hear the report. Reba looked at the house. She looked at Van. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of that old fire. Let's see what we bought. The inspector walked out of the front door, wiping his brow. He looked at them solemnly. Well, the house is a dump. Van's face fell. Reba felt the world tilt. Just kidding. The inspector grinned. I love doing that. The house is solid. Roof is new. Plumbing is copper. And the foundation is like a rock. You guys got a steal. Reba nearly collapsed with relief. Van, we did it. We're flippers. As they celebrated, the inspector turned to Van. Funny though, usually people don't pay for 2 inspections in 1 week. Reba froze. 2 inspections. The inspector nodded. Yeah, Van had me out here last Tuesday before he put the offer in. He knew the house was perfect before he even showed it to you. Reba turned to Van, her eyes narrowing. You set me up. The whole lucky speech. The as-is gamble. You knew all along. Van shrugged, a slow, guilty smile spreading across his face. I believe in you, Mrs. H, but I'm not an idiot. I'm a businessman. Chapter 6. The Shadow of 2 Names. Victory, Reba soon discovered, had a very specific scent. Stale cigarette smoke and wet dog. That was the primary olfactory profile of the steel Van had purchased. As they stood in the living room the following morning, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The walls were a shade of yellow that suggested the previous owners had been heavy smokers, or very confused about interior design. The carpet felt like it was alive, and not in a friendly, Pixar movie kind of way. Okay, Van Reba said, snapping a pair of yellow rubber gloves onto her hands. We have the house. We have the luck. Now we need the labor. If we want to flip this before the bubble bursts, we need to be out of here in 30 days. 30 days, Van scoffed, waving a crowbar around like a scepter. Mrs. H.I. was a linebacker. I can move walls. I can move mountains. A little wallpaper isn't going to stop the Montgomery Hart juggernaut. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, admitting a sliver of bright Texas sunshine and a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced smugness and expensive teeth. Well, the man said, his voice a smooth, oily drawl, and by dynamic, I mean desperate. Reba's spine stiffened. Davids, what are you doing here? Did you run out of other people's listings to exploit? David stepped into the room, his Italian leather loafers clicking ominously on the hardwood floor that was currently covered in grime. He looked around with an expression of performative pity. I heard you two actually bought this lemon. I'm here as a friend. Reba, a mentor, if you will. I'd rather take advice from a bag of hammers, Reba snapped. I'm serious, David said, leaning against a doorframe that looked suspiciously like it had wood rot. This neighborhood is shifting. The froth is turning into a foam. I'll do you a favor. I'll take this off your hands right now. Full price of what you paid. Plus $5 grand for your trouble. Consider it a failure insurance policy. Van stepped forward, the crowbar still in his hand. 5 grand. You made 50 on the last one. Davy, 2 names. You think we're that stupid? David smiled, a slow, shock-like expression. I think you're out of your league. Real estate isn't about hot, Reba. It's about cold. Hard numbers. And these numbers, they don't look good for you. You've got 30 days before the interest on that bridge loan starts eating your soul. See you at the auction. He turned and strolled out, the sound of his Porsche idling in the driveway serving as a final insult. Reba looked at Van. The silence in the dusty room was heavy. He's right about one thing, she whispered. The clock is ticking. Chapter 7. The Hammer of Justice. The first week of renovation was a descent into a specific kind of hell. Reba, Van, and a very reluctant Cheyenne were the primary labor force. Van's approach to demolition was enthusiastic but unguided. He had managed to take down an unload-bearing wall in 20 minutes, but he had also accidentally severed a water line that flooded the kitchen. It's a water feature, Van shouted as he tried to plug the leak with his thumb. It adds value. It's organic. Reba was currently balanced on a ladder, scraping 3 decades of popcorn sealing off with a spatula. Van, if you call one more disaster organic, I am going to bury you in the backyard and tell the police you were a natural fertilizer. Cheyenne was in the corner, wearing a designer face mask and gingerly painting a baseboard. I don't see why we can't just hire people. Mom, this is ruining my manicure. And the smell. I think I'm developing a permanent allergy to 1982. We can't hire people because we spent all the money on the down payment and the ass's closing costs, Reba grunted, a flake of ceiling landing in her hair. Sweat equity. Cheyenne, that's what flips are made of. As the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows through the bare windows, Brock pulled up in his SUV. He looked tired, but he was carrying several bags of fast food, the universal olive branch of the Hart family. I brought sustenance, Brock announced, stepping over a pile of discarded drywall. And news. Is the news that you've decided to pay for a contractor? Reba asked hopefully. No. The news is that Barbara Jean has decided she is a visionary designer, Brock said with a sigh. She's been watching HGTV for 18 hours straight. She has a mood board. And Reba, it involves a lot of turquoise. Reba closed her eyes. Lord, give me the stones to survive this. Chapter 8. The Turquoise Temptation. Barbara Jean arrived the next morning like a whirlwind of ruffles and enthusiasm. She was carrying a stack of magazines and a paint fan that was 90% neon. Reba, honey, I have it, she squealed, hugging Reba and leaving a faint scent of lavender and desperation on her work shirt. The friendly, Texas aesthetic. We're going to make this house feel like a warm hug from a neighbor you actually like. Barbara Jean, Reba said slowly, trying to maintain her sanity. This is a flip. It needs to be neutral. Grays, whites, maybe a grege, if we're feeling spicy. We want people to see themselves here, not a hug from a stranger. Oh, Reba, you're so cynical, Barbara Jean said, spreading her magazines across a dusty countertop. Look at this, Bo Hoshi questioned Zen. It's the next big thing. We need a feature wall in the living room. Something bold. Something that says, I have a personality and I'm not afraid to use it. Van walked in, covered in sawdust. I like bold. Bold is good. Is it as bold as putting a fork in a toaster? It's bolder, Van, Barbara Jean cried. It's turquoise dream. For the next 4 hours, Reba fought a losing battle against the turquoise tide. Every time she turned her back, Barbara Jean was pitching a whimsical light fixture or a tile pattern that looked like a kaleidoscope had an accident. But as Reba watched Barbara Jean watched the way she genuinely cared about making this space beautiful, she realized something. Barbara Jean wasn't just trying to design a house. She was trying to design a place where she belonged. Okay, Reba said, finally putting down her scraper. One feature wall. In the small bedroom. If the buyers hate it, we can paint over it in an hour. Barbara Jean's face lit up like a Christmas tree. You won't regret this. It's going to be a masterpiece. As Barbara Jean skipped off to the hardware store, Reba looked at Van. We are going to lose so much money, aren't we? Van put an arm around her, his dusty shoulder rubbing against her. Maybe. But hey, at least we'll have stones. Turquoise ones. Chapter 9. The Dust and the Dream. By the middle of the second week, the steel house had been stripped to its bones. The turquoise feature wall was done, looking like a neon bruise in the middle of a beige room. But Barbara Jean was delighted. Reba, on the other hand, was calculating the cost of a bucket of white primer. "It's about the journey," Mrs. H. Van said, his face smeared with soot. He had spent the morning in the crawl space trying to figure out why the guest bathroom smelled like low tide. "The journey is currently costing us $500 a day in interest. I'm pretty sure Cheyenne just threw her wedding ring into the dumpster by accident," Reba replied, pointing to her daughter who was currently waist-deep in construction debris. "I found it," Cheyenne shrieked, emerging with a coffee-stained hand clutching a diamond and a vintage soda bottle. "Maybe we can sell this on eBay." "Every little bit helps," Reba muttered. As they worked, a strange peace settled over the house. For the first time in years, the family was pulled together by a common goal. They weren't just fixing a house. They were building a bridge over the wreckage of the last decade. Brock stopped by more often, offering dental advice that was actually just an excuse to bring more tacos. Even Barbara Jean seemed less manic, her ruffles traded for a pair of denim overalls that she wore with a surprising amount of grace. "You know," Barbara Jean said, sitting on the floor of what would be the new kitchen, "I used to think that being happy was about having everything perfect. But this place, it's a mess, and I've never felt more alive." Reba looked at her. "That's the adrenaline, Barbara Jean, or the fumes from the floor stripper. Either way, enjoy it while it lasts." But as Reba turned back to the window she was sanding, she found herself smiling. Maybe Van was right. Maybe the froth on the market wasn't a bubble about to burst, but a wave they could finally learn to ride. Chapter 10. The Neighbor from Hell. Just as things were looking up, the universe reminded Reba that her luck was rarely a straight line. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, and a woman who looked like she had been carved out of a very expensive piece of granite stepped out. She marched up the driveway, her heels clicking like gunshots. "I am Mrs. Gable," the woman announced, not bothering with a greeting. "And I am the president of the Homeowners Association for this block, which, I might add, does not allow unauthorized structural modifications or visual disturbances like that thing." She pointed to the turquoise wall, which was visible through the uncurtained glass. "It's a feature wall," Barbara Jean piped up, appearing behind Reba. "It's boho chic." "It's a violation," Mrs. Gable snapped, "and I have it on good authority from a very reputable real estate agent, a Mr. David Davids. You are operating without a commercial flipping license." Reba's blood ran cold. "David Davids told you that?" "He was very concerned about the integrity of the neighborhood," Mrs. Gable said, handing Reba a thick envelope. "This is You have 48 hours to provide proof of all permits and licenses, or the city will red tag this property. And believe me, I will be watching." She turned and marched back to her car, leaving Reba standing in the dust of her own ambition. "He's trying to freeze us out," Reba whispered. "He knows we can't afford a delay. If the city shuts us down, the bank pulls the loan, we lose the house, the money, and Van's credit." Van walked out, his linebacker shoulders sagging. "What do we do, Mrs. 8? Reba looked at the turquoise wall, then at her family. The fire in her red hair seemed to catch. "We do what hearts always do. Van, we fight. Cheyenne, get me the phone. Barbara Jean, get me a gallon of greige paint. We're going to give Mrs. Gable a neighborhood she'll never forget." Chapter 11. The Midnight Paint Job. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and desperation. Reba spent the day at the city permit office, navigating a labyrinth of red tape that David Davids had clearly greased with a few well-placed donations. Meanwhile, back at the house, Van and Brock were performing a miracle of plumbing and electrical work. They weren't professionals, but they had stones and a YouTube tutorial for everything. "If this wire touches this pipe, does the house explode?" Brock asked, holding a pair of pliers. "Only if you're thinking negative thoughts, Doc," Van shouted from the other room. "Positive vibes only." When the sun went down, the real work began. They couldn't let Mrs. Gable see the turquoise wall through the window, but they didn't want to lose Barbara Jean's masterpiece just yet. "We're going to build a false wall," Reba commanded. A thin sheet of drywall, painted the most boring shade of taupe known to man. "We place it 6 inches in front of the turquoise wall. To the HOA, it looks neutral. To us, the dream stays alive." They worked through the night, lit by work lamps and fueled by the sheer spite of David David's sabotage. By 4 a.m., the house looked like a model home, sterile, safe, and utterly unaffected. As they sat on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold that made Barbara Jean's turquoise look subtle by comparison. A sense of grim triumph settled over them. "We did it," Cheyenne whispered, leaning her head on Van's shoulder. "We're not done yet," Reba said, her eyes fixed on the road. "Mrs. Gable will be here at 8, and I'm going to have the coffee ready." Chapter 12. The Storm. 8 o'clock came with the sound of a luxury car engine. Mrs. Gable arrived, flanked by a man in a city inspector's uniform. Reba stood on the porch, wearing her best "I'm a professional, and I haven't slept in 3 days" smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable, Inspector. Would you like a tour?" They walked through the house, the inspector checking permits with a meticulousness that suggested he had been told to find something wrong. But thanks to Reba's marathon at the city office, every T was crossed and every I was dotted. Mrs. Gable stood in the bedroom, staring at the false wall. "It's very neutral. It's what the market demands," Reba said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Well," the inspector said, shutting his clipboard, "everything seems to be in order. No violations here." Mrs. Gable looked disappointed, but she couldn't argue with the paperwork. As they left, Reba leaned against the doorframe, her legs finally giving out. "We won," Van cheered, lifting Reba into a bear hug. But as the afternoon progressed, the sky turned a bruised purple. A classic Texas thunderstorm was brewing, the kind that turned streets into rivers and tested every shingle on a roof. Van, Reba said, looking up at a dark spot on the ceiling. "Did you finish the flashing on the chimney?" Van's face went pale. "I was going to do that today, before the HOA lady arrived." A loud crack of thunder shook the house, and a single drop of water fell from the ceiling, landing right in the middle of the neutral taupe false wall. "Oh, no," Barbara Jean whispered. "The dream is getting wet." The sky opened up, and the steel house began to reveal its final, most devastating secret. It wasn't just a fixer-upper, it was a sieve. Chapter 13. The Bucket Brigade. The storm was relentless. Rain hammered against the house like a barrage of small stones, and the sound inside was deafening. Water didn't just leak, it poured. Pots, pans, anything that holds liquid. Reba screamed over the roar of the wind. They scrambled like a crew on a sinking ship. Van was in the attic with a flashlight, trying to divert the flow with a tarp that was too small for the task. Cheyenne was downstairs, sliding cooking pots under a dozen different drips. Barbara Jean, however, was focused on only one thing, the false wall. The taupe drywall was starting to bubble. The moisture from the leak was soaking into the plaster, making it heavy and sagging. "Reba, it's melting," Barbara Jean cried, holding her hands against the wall, as if she could keep it together with sheer will. "The grege is giving up. The turquoise dream is peeking through." "Forget the wall, Barbara Jean. The floor is going to warp," Reba shouted, dumping a bucket of brown water into the sink. Just then, the power flickered and died. The house was plunged into a strobe-lit nightmare, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. In the darkness, the sound of the house groaning under the weight of the water was terrifying. "Mrs. H." The flashing gave way. Van's voice echoed from the attic. "There's a waterfall coming down the chimney." Brock arrived 10 minutes later, soaked to the bone and carrying a crate of industrial-grade plastic sheeting. "I saw the clouds from the office. I figured you guys weren't ready for this." For the next 4 hours, they fought the house. They were a mess of mud, wet drywall, and frayed nerves. But as the storm finally began to lose its teeth, something strange happened. They stopped arguing. There was no room for ego when you were literal centimeters away from a total loss. By midnight, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. They were all slumped in the living room, sitting on the few dry spots of the sub. "We lost the false wall," Barbara Jean whispered, pointing to the bedroom. The taupe drywall had collapsed, revealing the bright, vibrant turquoise beneath. In the moonlight, it looked almost ethereal, a defiant splash of color in a gray, broken room. Reba looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her family, wet, exhausted, and covered in grit. "You know what? Let it stay. If a buyer doesn't like the turquoise dream, they don't deserve this house." Chapter 14. The Real Cost of Stones. The morning after the storm brought a devastating realization. The roof needed to be replaced. Entirely. $30,000, the contractor said, scratching his head. "And that's the friends and family price, because I feel sorry for you." Reba sat on the porch, her head in her hands. They didn't have $30,000. They were already at their limit. If they didn't finish the flip in 2 weeks, the interest on the loan would skyrocket, and the bank would foreclose. David's won, Reba said, her voice hollow. He knew this roof was a disaster. He waited for the storm to do his dirty work. Van walked out, unusually quiet. He sat next to her, looking at the street where the black Porsche was parked once again. David was waiting like a vulture. Mrs. H. Van said, I have something. It's not much, but it might get us over the finish line. He held out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a gold championship ring from his college football days. Van. No, Reba gasped. That's your most prized possession. You told me you wanted to be buried in that ring? I did, Van said, his voice steady. But I realized something last night during the storm. I don't need a ring to prove I have stones. Standing in that attic with you, fighting to save this dump. That was the real game, and I'm playing for the heart team now. Reba felt a lump in her throat she couldn't swallow. She took his hand, the one that had held the crowbar so clumsily, and squeezed it. We're going to win this, Van. Not for the money, for the team. Chapter 15. The Open House. 2 weeks later, the house was a miracle. The new roof gleamed in the sun. The interior was a perfect blend of Reba's neutral sophistication and Barbara Jean's friendly, Texas warmth. And yes, the turquoise dream remained a vibrant secret in the back bedroom. The open house sign was in the yard. Reba stood at the door, her red hair perfectly coiffed, her heart racing. David's was the first one through the door. He looked around, trying to find a flaw. He checked the corners for mold. He tapped the walls for hollow spots. Impressive, Reba, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Even if you sell it today, you'll barely break even after that roof repair. Was it worth the gray hair? It's not about the money anymore, Reba said, smiling as a young couple walked in. It's about the fact that I did it, and I didn't have to be a shark to get here. The couple wandered into the back bedroom. Reba held her breath. Ooh, look, the woman cried. Turk, it's so bold. It's exactly what I wanted for my studio. David's jaw tightened. He turned to leave, but his path was blocked by Brock and Van, who were standing in the hallway looking like two very large, very protective bodyguards. Leaving so soon, Davy, 2 names, Van asked, spinning a set of car keys. You haven't tried the meatballs. Barbara Jean made them. They're organic. Chapter 16. The house sold that afternoon. Full price. Cash offer. As they gathered in the kitchen of the hothouse that evening, the air was thick with triumph and the smell of cheap champagne. Reba held the check in her hands. The profit was small, only about $8,000 after all the repairs and debts were paid, but it felt like a fortune. To the first flip, Reba tossed it, raising her glass. To the stones, Van cheered. And to the satellite, Barbara Jean added, winking at Brock. Brock smiled and pulled her close. No more satellites, BJ. From now on, if you want to talk, I'm right here, and I've already downloaded a GPS app that never gets lost. The phone rang. Reba picked it up. Hello, Mrs. Hart. This is Hal from I'm calling to follow up on a service request from, Mr. Brock Hart. Reba looked at Brock, then at the phone. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face. Oh, Hal, you have no idea. Why don't you tell me all about it? I've got all night. Chapter 17. The Empire Strikes Back. Success in real estate is a lot like a high-speed chase. As soon as you stop to catch your breath, you realize you're being followed by a hungry predator. 3 months after the sale of the bungalow, Reba and Van had officially formed Hart and Montgomery Enterprises. They had a small office space, a shared computer, and a bank account that no longer looked like a tragic poem. We need a bigger challenge, Mrs. H., Van said, leaning over a map of Houston. The bungalow was just the preseason. I'm ready for the playoffs. The playoffs currently look like a 3-story Victorian on the edge of the historic district, Reba replied, pointing to a grainy photo of a house that looked like it belonged in a gothic horror novel. It's been on the market for 3 years. It's a local legend for being haunted. But I checked the records, it's just haunted by bad plumbing and a massive tax lien. Blackwood Manor, Van whispered, the name sounding like a challenge. It's got a turret. I've always wanted a turret. I could see the whole neighborhood. I could see David's coming from miles away. Reba laughed, but her eyes were serious. It's a huge risk, Vaughn. The renovation cost will be triple what the bungalow was. If we fail, It's not just your credit on the line, it's the whole business. Mrs. H, we have the dream, we have the stones, and most importantly, he gestured to the door where Barbara Jean was currently painting a sign in glitter. We have the designer. Chapter 18. The Victorian Shadow. Blackwood Manor was even more imposing in person. It loomed over the street like a disgruntled elder, its gingerbread trim sagging and its windows covered in a century of dust. "Oh, my lord," Barbara Jean breathed, stepping onto the porch. "It's beautiful. It's like a wedding cake that someone left out in the rain for 50 years. I can see it already." Shabby chic. "Try structural nightmare expensive mistake," Cheyenne said, following them with her toddler. "Mom, there's literally a tree growing through the kitchen window." "That's not a tree, Cheyenne. That's natural indoor landscaping," Van shouted, already heading for the turret. As they explored the house, the silence was heavy. The air felt thick with the history of the families who had lived and failed here. Reba found herself in the grand library, where the floorboards creaked in a way that sounded almost like a warning. Suddenly, the front door swung open. It wasn't the wind. David Davids stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He looked furious. "I see you bought the Blackwood place," he said, his voice flat. "I warned you about the neighborhood shifting, Reba. This is professional suicide." "You seem very invested in our suicide," David Reba said, crossing her arms. "Why is that? Are you afraid we might actually make this place look good?" "I'm afraid you're going to devalue the entire district with your turquoise dreams and amateur hour renovations," David snapped. "I've just purchased the empty lot next door. I'm building a high-rise, modern complex, glass, steel, minimalist. It will tower over this old wreck and turn it into a shadow." "A high-rise," Reba gasped. "This is a historic district, David. You can't just build a skyscraper here." "Watch me," David said, his eyes cold. "I have the city council in my pocket. By the time you finish your first coat of paint, the demolition crews will be breaking ground next door. Have fun in the dark, Reba." Chapter 19. Secrets in the Floorboards. The war for Blackwood Manor began that evening. "He's trying to block our light," Barbara Jean cried, clutching her mood board. "If he builds a high rise, no one will ever see the turret. The turret is the soul of the house." "We have to stop him," Reba said, her mind racing. "If he has the council, we can't fight him through the usual channels." Van was silent, his brow furrowed in thought. He was sitting on the floor of the library, absent-mindedly tapping a loose floorboard. "Wait a minute, Mrs. H. Look at this." He pulled up the board, revealing a small, rusted metal box hidden in the joists. "What is it?" "Treasure," Cheyenne asked, leaning in. Reba opened the box. Inside weren't gold coins or jewels. There were letters, old, yellowed letters, dated back to the 19th. "These are from the original builder, Elias Blackwood," Reba whispered, reading the delicate script. "He's writing to his sister. He's talking about a deed, a restriction." She scanned the pages, her eyes widening. "Van, listen to this. I have ensured that no structure taller than the manor shall ever be built on the surrounding lands. For the view of the bay must remain clear for the ghosts of our ancestors. It's a perpetual easement." He recorded it with the state, not the city. "Does that mean David can't build his high?" Van asked, his face intelligence up. "It means that as the owners of the manor, we hold the rights to the sky," Reba said, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. "David Davids didn't do his homework. He bought a lot he can't use for anything taller than a doghouse." Chapter 20. The Vulture's Revenge. The next morning, Reba didn't go to the city council. She went directly to David David's office. She placed a copy of the 1922 easement on his mahogany desk. "Good morning, David. I thought you might want some light reading for your breakfast." David read the document, his face turning a shade of purple that even Barbara Jean would find offensive. This can't be valid. It's 100 years old." "In Texas, easements are like redheads, David," Reba said, leaning over his desk. "They're stubborn, they're loud, and they never go away. You can build your minimalist glass box, but it has to be exactly 1 story tall. Otherwise, I'll see you in court for the next decade." David slumped into his chair, the smugness finally draining out of him. "You've ruined me. I spent millions on that lot." "No, David," Reba said, her voice softening just a fraction. "You ruined yourself. You forgot that real estate is about more than cold, hard numbers. It's about the stories we tell and the history we protect. As she walked out of his office, the Texas sun felt warmer than ever. She drove back to Blackwood Manor, where Van was currently hanging a Hart and Montgomery sign from the turret. "Everything okay, Mrs. H?" Van shouted from above. "Better than okay," Van Reba shouted back. "The sky is clear. Let's get to work." Chapter 21. The Turret's Secret. Restoring Blackwood Manor wasn't like flipping a bungalow. It was an archaeological dig. Every time Van swung a hammer, he found something: hidden servant bells, antique wallpaper patterns, and enough dust to build a second house. "Mrs. H, come look at this," Van called from the very top of the turret. Reba climbed to the narrow, winding stairs, her heart racing. When she reached a small, circular room at the top, she found Van staring at a small alcove, hidden behind a piece of wood. Inside was a leather-bound diary and a dried rose, preserved by the dry Texas air. "It belonged to Clara Blackwood," Reba whispered, opening the brittle pages. "She was the sister," Elias wrote to. "She never left this house. She spent her days up here, painting the sunrise." As Reba read the diary, a new layer of the house revealed itself. This wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary. Clara had written about her love for a man she could never be with, rival architect who had built the very houses Elias hated. "Wow," Vance said, his voice hushed. "So the house is haunted by a forbidden romance. That's way better than toxic mold." "It's more than that," Van Reba said, her eyes gleaming. "It gives the house a heart. People don't just want a renovated mansion. They want to live in a story." Barbara Jean, "We're changing the design." Chapter 22. The Heart of the House. Barbara Jean took the news of the diary with the same level of intensity as a professional athlete preparing for the Olympics. "Forbidden love, secret letters, a turret of longing," Barbara Jean cried, her ruffles vibrating with excitement. "We're going to call it the Clara Collection. Soft velvets, hidden nooks, and we're going to restore her painting studio exactly as it was." While Barbara Jean focused on the aesthetic, Reba found herself focused on a different kind of restoration. She started visiting the local archives to find more about Clara's mystery man. It was there that she met Marcus Thorne, the city's lead historian. Marcus was everything David Davids was not: quiet, academic, and deeply passionate about the past. He had silver-streaked hair, and a way of looking at Reba that made her forget she was covered in paint and drywall dust. "You're the one saving the Blackwood place," Marcus said, his voice like warm mahogany. "Most people would have just torn it down and built a parking lot." "I like a challenge, Marcus," Reba said, feeling a blush crawl up her neck. "And I think the house has something to say." Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular fixture at the manor. He helped Reba verify the easements and provided historical blueprints, saved them thousands in structural repair. But more importantly, he started bringing Reba coffee in the morning's coffee without egg. Chapter 23. The Vulture's Last Stand. David Davids wasn't finished, though the easement had blocked his high-rise. He had one last card to play. He knew that Hart and Montgomery were over. If he couldn't block the view, he would block the cash flow. One afternoon, a man in a dark suit arrived at the manor. He wasn't a neighbor or an inspector. He was a representative from the bank. "Mrs. Hart, I'm afraid there's an issue with your construction draw," the man said. "The bank has received an anonymous tip backed by documentation that the historic preservation status of this house makes it a higher risk liability. We're freezing your credit line. Effective immediately." Reba felt the floor drop out from under her. "Anonymous tip. Let me guess. A man with two names and a Porsche." "The source is irrelevant," the man said, "unless you can provide a secondary guarantee or pay off the primary lien of $500,000. We will be forced to move toward foreclosure." Van walked in, his face pale. $500,000. We don't have 50 grand, let alone 500. Reba looked at the half-finished grand staircase, then at the turret where Clara's diary still sat. They were so close. "I'm not giving up, Van," Reba said, her voice hard. "I've got one more move." Chapter 24. The Gala of the Century. Reba didn't call a lawyer. She called Marcus Thorne. "We're going to hold a gala," Reba announced. "A Save the Blackwood fundraising event. We're going to invite every historical society, every wealthy philanthropist, and every bored socialite in Houston. We're going to sell them the story of Clara and Elias." For 48 hours, the house was a hive of activity. Cheyenne and Van worked on the lighting, while Barbara Jean turned the overgrown gardens into a Victorian wonderland. Brock even stepped in, using his dental contacts to secure a high-end caterer. The night of the gala, Blackwood Manor shone like a beacon. The turquoise feature, while now a subtle, elegant accent in the library, served as the backdrop for the Clara Collection exhibit. David Davids arrived uninvited, looking for blood. You think a few glasses of champagne will save this wreck, Reba? The bank moves in at midnight. Wait for it, David, Reba said, her eyes fixed on the door. At 10 p.m., a limousine pulled up. Out stepped a woman who looked like she owned half of Texas B, 'cause she did. It was Mrs. Sterling, the matriarch of the Houston Arts Council. I've heard the story of Clara, Mrs. Sterling said, walking through the foyer. It's been a long time since this city valued its soul more than its square footage. Reba Hart, I understand you have a lien issue. We do, Mrs. Sterling, Reba said. Consider it gone, the woman said, waving a hand. The Arts Council will purchase the manor as a protected landmark. You will stay on as the permanent curators and project leads. And as for the lot next door, she looked at David Davids with a gaze that could wither a cactus. I think it would make a lovely public park. Don't you, David? Chapter 25. The Call from California. Just as the dust settled on the Blackwood Manor project, a new kind of storm was brewing, one made of cameras, lighting rigs, and a very persistent producer named Jocks. Jocks was from a major cable network in Los Angeles, and he had seen the viral footage of the Blackwood Gala. He didn't just want the house, he wanted the heart. It's the perfect narrative arc, Jocks shouted into the speakerphone. The fiery redhead, the former linebacker, the quirky designer with a turquoise obsession. We call it the Texas flip. It's raw, it's real, it's profitable. Reba looked at Van, who was currently wearing a hard hat with a GoPro attached to it. I don't know. Jocks, we're builders, not actors. I don't want to spend my day faking drama for the ratings. Who said anything about faking? Jocks laughed. Your family provides enough drama naturally to power a small city. We start shooting the pilot in 2 weeks. Don't let me down. Chapter 26. The arrival of the film crew turned Blackwood Manor into a chaotic circus. Suddenly, every nail hammered and every wall painted had to be done twice, once for the house and once for the camera. Can you say that again? Van, but with more longing, the director asked. Longing for what? Van asked, confused. Longing for the legacy, the director sighed. While Van struggled with his lines, Barbara Jean flew. She had started wearing even more ruffles, specifically designed to catch the light. She had even convinced the crew that turquoise was a spiritual color. But beneath the glamour, tension was rising. The network wanted more conflict. They wanted Reba to fight with the contractors. They wanted Cheyenne to have a breakdown over a tile choice. I'm not doing it, Jocks, Reba said, pulling him aside. This is a real business. If we look like amateurs on national TV, David Davids will be laughing all the way to the bank. David Davids, Jax's eyes lit up. Wait, is he the rival agent? The one who tried to block the view? Get him on the show. He's the perfect villain. Chapter 27. As the pilot episode neared completion, a face from the past appeared that wasn't in the script. Jake Hart, Reba's ex-husband, had seen the promos for the show. He arrived at the manor unannounced, looking for a reunion that clearly involved a cut of the new business. I saw you on the news, Reba, Jake said, leaning against the restored banister. Looks like life has been good to you. I figured, since we were partners for 20 years, maybe I should be a partner in this enterprise too. Reba felt a coldness in her chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You weren't a partner, Jake. You were a passenger, and the ride ended 5 years ago. The cameras would love a redemption story, wouldn't they? Jake whispered, nodding toward the film crew. Imagine the ratings if the long-lost husband returns to help his family. Van stepped in, his linebacker shadow falling over Jake. The only story we're telling here is how we built this without you. Now, you can leave the way you came, or I can show you the stones Reba's been talking about. Jake left, but the damage was done. The network loved the footage. They wanted to make Jake a recurring character. Over my dead body, Reba said. She realized then that the biggest risk wasn't the market or the money. It was losing the integrity of her own life for a few minutes of fame. Chapter 20. The Ultimate Flip. Reba made a choice. She sat down with Jocks and their network executives and gave them an ultimatum. We'll do the show, Reba said. But we're changing the format. We're not just flipping mansions for millionaires. Every third project we do will be a community flip. We find a family in need, a veteran, a single parent, a teacher aunt. We restore their home for free, using the profits from the show. The executives hesitated. But where's the conflict? Where's the drama? The drama is in the survival, Reba said. The drama is in seeing a roof that doesn't leak for the first time in 10 years. That's the hot brand. Take it or leave it. They took it. The first community flip was a tiny house on the south side of town, belonging to a nurse who had lost everything in the storm. The episode broke every ratings record the network had. People didn't want sharks. They wanted heroes. Chapter 29. The Corporate Shark. Success, as Reba Hard was quickly learning, was the ultimate shark bait. By the end of the second season of the Texas Flip, Hart and Montgomery Enterprises wasn't just a local success. It was a national brand. But with that brand came interest from people who didn't care about community flips or historic ease. They cared about the bottom line. A letter arrived at the office, embossed with the gold leaf of Apex Global Realty. They wanted to buy the brand. They wanted to turn the turquoise dream into a line of mass, low-quality home goods sold in every big-box store in America. They're offering us $10 million, Mrs. H. Van said, his voice trembling as he read the figure. 10 million. And in exchange, we lose control of everything, Reba said, pacing the small office. Barbara Jean wouldn't be able to pick a paint color without a committee approval. Our community flips would be turned into tax write-offs managed by accountants in Delaware. No, Van, we say no. But Mom, Cheyenne said, looking at the number, think of what we could do with that money. We could fund 100 community projects. Not if they own our names, Cheyenne, Reba countered. Once you sell your soul to a shark, you don't get to decide what's for dinner. Chapter 30. The Neighborhood That Time Forgot. To clear her head, Reba took the team to a new project, a community flip, in a neighborhood called the Hollows. It was an area forgotten by the city, where the streets were cracked, and the houses were held together by hope and peeling paint. The project was a small, 2-bedroom cottage belonging to Mrs. Higgins, a retired schoolteacher, who had taught half the neighborhood how to read. Her roof had been failing for a decade, and her foundation was sinking into the soft Texas soil. This is our real work, Reba said, looking at the house. This isn't for the cameras. This is for Mrs. Higgins. But as they started the demolition, they found a problem that no amount of stones could fix easily. The entire neighborhood was sitting on an old, undocumented toxic waste site from a factory that had closed in the 50s. The ground is contaminated, Mrs. H. Van said, looking at the soil samples. If the city finds out, they'll condemn the whole block. Mrs. Higgins and 40 other families will be homeless. Suddenly, the $10 million offer from Apex started to look like more than just a buyout. Reba realized that Apex knew about the contamination. They wanted to buy the Hart brand so they could buy the land under the guise of redevelopment, kick everyone out, and pocket the government cleanup subsidies. Chapter 31. The tension reached a breaking point when Reba discovered that Jocks, the show's producer, had been in talks with Apex behind her back. It's a win-win, Reba, Jocks shouted during a heated meeting in the Manor's library. Apex cleans up the site. You get the credit for saving the neighborhood on TV, and everyone gets paid. Who cares if the families have to relocate? They'll get a nice settlement check. They don't want a check, Jocks. They want their homes. Reba screamed. You've been playing both sides this whole time. I'm a producer, Reba. I produce hits, and this is the ultimate season finale. Reba turned to Van and Barbara Jean. We're shutting down the show. Right now. You can't do that. You're under contract. Jocks laughed. Watch me, Reba said. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the original 1922 easement for Blackwood Manor. I didn't just record the easement for the manor. Jocks, I found a clause in the neighborhood charter for the Hollows. This entire district was gifted to the city with a right of return clause. If the land is ever found to be unfit for habitation, the city is legally required to provide on-site remediation without displacing the residents. Apex can't touch it. Chapter 32. The War for the Hollows lasted 6 months. Reba and Marcus Thorne worked day and night, using the historical documents to force the city's hand. The cameras were gone. The network had sued, but the Hart family stood their ground. In the end, the city was forced to fund the cleanup, while the families stayed in temporary housing, provided by the Hart and Montgomery Foundation. Apex Global Realty pulled their offer, their stock price tumbling after the scandal went public. On a warm Texas evening, Mrs. Higgins finally moved back into her cottage. The roof was new, the foundation was level, and the living room had a single, elegant feature wall in a shade Barbara Jean called Higgins Hobe, glowing turquoise that looked like a summer sky. Reba sat on the porch of Blackwood Manor, her hand in Marcus's. The house was finally quiet. "You lost $10 million, Reba," Marcus said softly. "No," Reba said, looking at her daughter, her son-in-law, and her granddaughter playing in the park across the street. "I kept the only thing that actually has value. I kept the stones." Ven walked out, holding 2 glasses of champagne. To the Hart team, Mrs. H. might be the only flippers in history who ended up richer by giving it all away. To the team, Reba toasted. The phone rang in the hallway. Reba didn't move. "Let it ring," she said, leaning back into the mahogany warmth of the porch. "Whoever it is, they can wait for the next chapter." Epilogue. The road ahead. The Houston sky was a deep, velvet blue. As Reba sat on the steps of the restored Blackwood Manor, the lights from the turret twinkled above, a tribute to a woman who had once watched the world from there. The business was booming. Van had become the king of the turrets. And now, a household name. Barbara Jean's turquoise dream had become a national trend. Cheyenne was the head of the Hart and Montgomery Foundation, overseeing the community projects. Brock was currently inside, showing the pilot episode to a group of friends, while Barbara Jean critiqued her own lighting. Marcus walked out onto the porch, handing Reba a glass of wine. "You did it, Reba. You didn't just save the story. You changed the way people see home." "No," Reba said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We just gave everyone a place to belong." She looked out across the street, where the park was full of children playing. There was no sign of the past, only the bright, clear future. Reba Hart had finally found her own quick exit strategy. She didn't need to leave. She had finally arrived. Note to user: the requested advanced model features are unavailable in Canvas. This response utilized the fallback model. The Heart of a Survivor. A novel based on the life of Reba Hart. Chapter 1. The Barbecue of Despair. The Houston sun was an oppressive weight, a humid blanket that smelled of charcoal, lighter fluid, and the faint, sweet scent of blooming jasmine. Reba Hart stood on her back porch, her hands shielded against the glare as she watched her ex-husband flip a burger with the kind of practiced enthusiasm usually reserved for heart surgery. This was the 10th barbecue of the season, or maybe it just felt like it. In the world of the Harts, the lines between family time and organized chaos had long since blurred into a smear of suburban domesticity that Reba sometimes found harder to navigate than her divorce. "I found you a man, Reba," Barbara Jean's voice chirped from the picnic table, cutting through the sizzle of meat. Barbara Jean, the woman who had replaced Reba as Brock's wife, was currently wearing a sun hat the size